Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Bonnie Brzozowski. I'm a public services librarian at the Corvallis-Benton County Public Library. Welcome to this presentation of Owens Farm / the Jackson Fraser Wetland Complex. This is the third and final of the 2023 Liz and Bob Frankel Environment and Hiking Spring Webinar Series. The theme for this year's series has been Reviving and Hiking Willamette Valley Wetlands. The first in our series was held on March 22nd. It was titled Reviving the Wetlands at Findlay National Wildlife Refuge with Jared Jabusek, wildlife biologist for U.S. Fish and Wildlife. I'm going to provide a link to a recording of that event. We just posted it on our YouTube channel. So let me get that into the chat here. Here we go. I apologize, having trouble finding it, but it has been discovered. There we go. So that is the link to the March 22nd lecture about Findlay National Wildlife Refuge. The second event in this series was held on April 19th. It was titled Reviving the Wetlands at Herbert Farm Natural Area. That was with Jude Geist, Tom Kay, and Sarah Aleka. Here's a link to a recording of that event as well. Just a note that this happens to be a computer-generated captioned version, so it's not quite as well captioned as the first one. The finished and human captioned version of that particular event will be posted on the library's YouTube page. Here is a link to our YouTube page. I'm going to provide it just because there are so many great other lectures there, including past Liz and Bob Frankel webinar series videos as well from past years. So as I'm sure you've noticed, we're using Zoom tonight. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation. We're going to try to answer some of those at the end. You click on the question mark to submit your questions. It's often in the top left of your screen, but it's going to vary widely depending on the type of device you're using. But now I'm going to hand it over to Dave Eckert. He's the program chair for the Mary's Peak group of the Sierra Club, going to tell us more about the series co-sponsors, as well as our fantastic presenters for tonight. But I also want to thank Dave for all the work he puts into this series each year. The library feels very fortunate to be a part of it. So thank you so much, Dave, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you, Bonnie, and thanks for all the work you've done on this for the last few years. So, like Bonnie said, this is our third, and very excited about this. Our first was about a mature wetland that was regenerated. The second one was about more of an adolescent regeneration of a wetland at Herbert Farm Natural Area, and this one is a site that has a mature wetland or a couple of wetlands, but it's going to become, but it's now at the early stages of a large continuous complex. And we're very, very excited to have this on tonight. Those who knew Liz and Bob Frankel, I know I don't have to say anything, but if you didn't know them, these were very special people who played both local, regional, and state and national roles in the good things that have happened in the environment over the last many decades. They passed away, and a few years ago, and we have named the project after them. We live in Champinafu. This is the land of the Ampinofu Kalapuya. That includes the Marys River watershed, which in turn includes Corvallis and Philomath. The Kalapuya culture is alive, and it's very important that we acknowledge where we're living, whose land this had been and has been for over 15,000 years. And it's also important that we do something. The Mary's Peak group of the Sierra Club and many other organizations are doing the part at the request of the Kalapuya at the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde to plant more camas, plant more tarweed, Madia elegans, and plant more other native plants that are critical to the existence of the Kalapuya culture. and I hope you do too. Thank you. The Mary's Peak Group has administered this program overall for many, many years. And the whole point of the spring program is to show what the culture is that we're trying to inspire, a culture engaged with flora, fauna, soil, water, and geological features. And for the webinar series, we have been honored to be have a co-sponsor of the Corvallis Benton County Public Library, who is kind enough to host the series and do all the technical work. And Bonnie and her crew has been just fabulous to work with. And thank you, Bonnie. Like Bonnie said, we've already had the first one at Finley this year with again, our theme was regenerating wetlands. And then the second one, Herbert Farm. And then here we are at the Owens Farm, Jackson Fraser wetland, which you'll hear about. Now, we are honored to have four wonderful presenters, all of whom are deeply involved in this project, each from their own organization. And on the left is Jessica McDonald. And Jessica works for the Greenbelt Land Trust as the executive director for at least the last 3 years. And before that, for 8 years, 8 years ago, she was named the associate director. And then 14 years ago, she was named as its first development director. So Jessica has been doing wonderful work for the Greenbelt Land Trust for many years. She's also the lead for developing the Confluence building that the Greenbelt Land Trust and other nonprofits will be moving into downtown, adjacent to the Robnett's hardware store that many of you know about. And she's also president emeritus of the Corvallis League of Women Voters. So we're honored to have Jessica, and she will be the first presenter. Jessie Ott, to Jessica's right, is the deputy director of the Benton County Natural Areas Park and Events Department. And he's also a joy to work with. Prior to that position, he served in multiple positions elsewhere as an arborist and parks manager in the Pacific Northwest. He's also a member of the AFRANA Board of Directors, which you'll hear about from Ellen in a minute. Meredith Pettit, to Jessie's right, is the director of Corvallis Parks and Recreation Department. Previous to this job, she was the Recreation and Parks Director for the city of El Segundo, California. And prior to that job, she was the Recreation Manager for Agora Hills, California. So this exciting to see her involved with this now. And to Meredith's right is Ellen Tapon, is the president of the Alliance for Recreation and Natural Areas, known as AFRANA, that serves as the Friends of organization of natural areas in Benton County. She also serves on the steering committee of the Mary's Peak Alliance. She has worked for both the U.S. Forest Service and Hewlett-Packard for many, many, many years. And she has served on many local nonprofit boards, too many to even begin to mention. She is also a master gardener, master naturalist, and a certified Mary's Peak interpretive guide. And she has served on the Benton County Natural Areas and Parks Advisory Board since 2009. Now, all four of these people represent four different organizations that are deeply involved with this project that you're going to hear about tonight. And I'm going to repeat something that Bonnie said, is that we hope you have questions. We encourage you to have questions, but please put them in the Q&A. Do not put them in chat. Please put them in the Q&A anytime throughout the series. And Bonnie will be hosting the Q&A at the end. And with that, I'm done. Thank you, and on with the show.
Great, thank you, Dave. And now I'm going to take over screen sharing here. And Jessie, can you give me a thumbs up that that looks right on your screen? I see your head in my Zoom profile. Great, thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this conversation on the future of an incredible community project here at Owens Farm and Jackson Fraser Wetlands. This has been a long time in the making, and there's a long road ahead of us. I'm excited to be unveiling many of the details to you all today. And as Dave and Bonnie mentioned, we'll be hearing from myself, from Meredith, Jesse, and Ellen this evening as we touch different components of this really dynamic series of properties. And I wanted to just do my own shout out to Bob and Liz Frankel, incredible community leaders and people that were instrumental in the work of Greenbelt Land Trust for decades. And fortunately, were people that I was able to learn from and be able to try to follow a little bit in their footsteps. And I just have the most appreciation for Dave and the group that has moved this lecture series forward in their name. What a legacy that they have in our community. So today, what we are looking at is touching on a few different pieces of this larger partnership. We could be talking about this for hours, but we have a limited amount of time. So we're going to focus what we're talking about. We're trying to share with you all. So essentially, we're going to give you an overview of the property and the background on this partnership and this effort. Thinking about how we walk you through a conceptual trail plan and that vision for the future, and also relay how we have really thought about community engagement a little differently than we have in previous projects, how we're piloting a deeper investment in equity and justice in our community engagement at the onset of this work at Jackson Fraser Wetlands and Owens Farm. And then we're going to give you some teasers, talk about 3 different projects that are happening right now that are within the partnership. And of course, we couldn't end without saying how to get involved, because we need your help now more than ever. So most importantly, we want to paint a picture for you of what we envision for the future and how our community can be transformed through a personal connection to the outdoors that enriches our bodies, our minds, our spirit. This initiative is creating a new roadmap for how we think about trails here in our community. And I think it's really exciting to be at the drawing table for this community vision. And, one that isn't just a vision. It's going to move to reality really soon. And just where is Owens Farm and Jackson Fraser Wetlands, you ask? Well, let's just jump right into it. Dave gave a little preview of a larger map here. Let me walk you through this. You don't have to really understand or be able to see every piece of this pretty dynamic map. But what we're looking at here is the north side of Corvallis. Here we sit Owens Farm and Jackson Fraser Wetlands in the blue area. And we see the context of the larger region. Owens Farm and Jackson Fraser Wetlands are a 477-acre network of interconnected property managed by Benton County, Greenbelt Land Trust, the City of Corvallis, and Samaritan Health Services. And again, it's a little difficult to see all of the inner workings of this map, but I'll point out a few of the key details. With the white arrows that are dotted white arrows here, you are seeing future potential opportunities for connection. Now imagine a future where you might come into the Shelderland neighborhood from downtown Corvallis via a multimodal path. And you take a walk along the Jackson Fraser Boardwalk. You access Owens Farm across Highway 99 by a pedestrian walkway, and then continue all the way on up to Chip Ross and even into Mac Forest. While this vision of connecting, this bigger vision of connectivity is really exciting, we know also that we have to kind of break this up into pieces that we actually can do work on the ground and move this forward. And yet, how inspiring it is to be able to keep front and center this bigger picture of connectivity across the community. It's a big vision, a bold idea, and yet we believe that now is the time that it's all possible. Now, as we jump into really where the boundaries here at Owens Farm and Jackson Fraser Wetlands, you see Greenbelt Land Trust on the north side of both Highway 99, Benton County at Jackson Fraser Wetlands, and we have the City of Corvallis on both sides of Highway 99, and then we have a strip of property owned by Samaritan Health Services adjacent to the hospital. And, you know, Owens Farm is a property that is brimming with potential. What's so special about it, especially as we look to the west side of the highway here, we're looking at the connectivity to our largest regional medical center here in the Willamette Valley. And it sits on the edge of town. This is the Green Gateway. It was often called the Green Gateway into and out of Corvallis. And it is rich with extensive historical connections as well. It does have active farming on the property, as well as an incredible mixture of native habitats, wetland, prairie, oak, and it has the capacity for future trails. But potentially one of the most unique aspects is its proximity and direct access to that regional hospital. What a great opportunity as we think to the future for providing respite and rejuvenation and access to families that are visiting the hospital, to patients, to staff. I think this is one of those really key elements of this partnership that makes it a little different than many other sites. We're going to ask each of our partner organizations to speak for a minute about their property as we go through the next few slides. And mainly, I just want to focus here to be able to give some context for the different partners, again, in those different properties that we just saw outlined. First, I'm going to pass the baton to Meredith at the City of
Great, thank you, Jessica. Good evening, everybody. Glad to be here tonight to share the City of Corvallis's portion of the Owens Farm property. So the City of Corvallis, as Jessica had mentioned, owns the portion, a good portion of the property, the Owens Farm along Highway 99, mostly to the west of Highway 99. This property was purchased by the city through funds just after the open space bond passed in 2000. And with that open space bond, the city had identified 5 different open space properties, and this being one of them. And after the city purchased the property, it was immediately sold and divided into the parcels that you see on your screen there to the various partners, Greenbelt Land Trust and Samaritan Health Services. There were reasons behind how the parcels were divided, which I think you'll gather along the way here as the different partners describe the significant features of each of these areas. And particularly with the City of Corvallis portion, which is managed here by our Parks and Recreation Department, is a good portion of the agriculture property. And as Jessica mentioned, this is really what you see as the gateway, the Green Gateway into Corvallis as you're traveling from the north into the city. And that was really one of the primary features of this, the desire to acquire the property, really to make sure that this community has a space to celebrate the rich history, the agricultural history that's, you know, so significant to the area. As what you'll notice when you go to the city's portion of the property, as you probably have all seen, the gravel driveway to access the homestead. You'll see a couple parking spaces or an area that you can park, a park kiosk with information, and then a gate. And so really right now, this property is not open to the public. Various our agencies do offer some invited and escorted trips and tours up into the property. But right now, the general public can simply view it from below. And what you'll see up there is a part of the homestead, the original homestead. You can see the historic farmhouse, which we'll talk a lot about later. And sometimes it's more masked than others by some vegetation that still exists. And a lot of that vegetation is hundreds of years old. And what you'll mostly see, I think the most visible structure up there on the knoll is the Sunnyside School. That is not that is not original to the site that it sits on today, but it was moved from less than a mile away more recently in about 2014. It was moved up to the site, and there's some significance with why that makes sense. But the farmhouse sits there. The frontage of it is east facing, and it really has a beautiful view of the valley below. Later in the presentation, you'll learn about opportunities to visit it and experience it for yourself. So the city of Corvallis, this is a long time in the making, 2000, so over 20 years. This vision has been created for Owens Farm. And it's important to note that that it really is supported by the community's vision, and at a wide level, the community has created a vision for Corvallis, what they want this community, what are the goals of the community for 2040. And you can see on the screen here some main themes that came out of the Imagine Corvallis 2040 initiative. And this Owens Farm project really touches on each of those. As we narrow down into other city plans and engagement throughout the years, the city operates on our strategic operational plan, which is a 5-year rolling plan that is based on these same themes from the Imagine Corvallis 2040. Narrowing that even further into the Parks and Recreation Master Plan and the goals of the master plan, this project is supported by those. And the city also has an Owens Farm management plan, which really outlines the vision for the property in terms of public access, education opportunities, celebrating the historical significance, and really getting people out there on the land to experience it.
Thanks, Meredith. So I'm going to give an overview of Greenbelt Land Trust portion of Owens Farm. It's about 95 acres. As Meredith mentioned, our portion was also purchased in 2001, 22 years ago. It really was a first for Greenbelt in many ways. It was the first purchased acquisition that we held on to. It's kind of a watershed moment in our organization. It's our first acquisition grant. And it was also the first property where restoration was required, so habitat restoration. And Owens Farm is definitely one of those properties that's just really special, to our organization, to our staff, to those that have supported us. So for our portion, we, as I mentioned, had acquisition grant through Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. We also catalyzed a large community campaign to be able to acquire our portion of Owens Farm. Amidst restored oak woodlands, you can hear the song of acorn woodpeckers calling to each other. In the wetlands and along Jackson and Fraser Creeks that run through our portion of the property, you will find rare and threatened plants like Nelson's checker mallow. And throughout the year, you can see Greenbelt leading property walks from cultural history to birding, and even we've had a couple of beers made by walking out there, where wild yeast spores were collected during the walk to make an Owens Farm Funk beer, which is pretty cool. This is a gem of a property, one that Greenbelt has deep ties to and invested in its future. And today we don't have one of our partners from Samaritan Health Services here, so I'm just going to speak for them as well. Their portion of the property was purchased and also as part of that transaction in 2001. And great opportunities for access, again, for staff, for patients, for neighborhood, Satinwood neighborhood. And the hospital purchased their portion of the property for future expansion of the hospital and opportunities to be able to facilitate that expansion. I wanted to also just note that if you're in the hospital, especially if you're in the maternity ward, probably everybody has a story that knows somebody who has had a child or yourself in at Good Sam. You likely looked out at Owens Farm during that process of labor. And I have heard so many stories from people that have been patients in the hospital and tell me once they learn I work at Greenbelt about how much peace and joy being able to look out at Owens Farm brought to them in that moment. And I think that what a great reminder of the power of nature to bring healing and sort of and peace into our lives. And we're going to kick that up a notch by having actual access. You don't just have to look at it out your window. You can actually come and take a walk on this property in the future and not too long as well. So now we're going to pass it over to our friends at Benton County.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for having me this evening. And yeah, so the Jackson Fraser wetland is a super special site. It's years ago, many years ago, I guess it was a part of a large native wetland prairie that the Kalapuya tribes would burn, a vast tract, where they would use the site mostly for camas, tarweed, onion bulbs, and food production like that. And so for years, the site, after European settlers arrived and started settling here, the site really changed, started to be used more as grazing and kind of a rough hay farming type operation. And then over time, it passed on to kind of like hunters doing ponds to hunt waterfowl and that type of thing. And so over time, the wetland was really degraded. There were a lot of berms created, and parts of the creeks were filled in and degraded, and it made it a much less functioning wetland space. Even though, if you stand at the Jackson Fraser wetland and look across Highway 99, you can see the natural contour of the land where all the water flows into Jackson Fraser. And so, kind of coming out of the environmental movement of the late 60s and 70s, Department of State Lands and local conservationists in the area really started looking at Jackson Fraser wetland as something that needed to be saved. And at one point in the 80s, the landowner was it was really the first instance of Department of State Lands really going after to protect wetlands. It was something that it was kind of a landmark case in the early 80s where Department of State Lands demanded some restoration happen to the wetland from the landowner. And eventually that landowner had moved out of the area, and there was back taxes. And at that point, the Benton County commissioners, made the move to really protect that space. And so they acquired it and turned the 147 acres into a park and a wetland space. And so, really after that, a technical advisory committee was formed to develop a plan for the site. And eventually we got the boardwalk built out there, the volunteer built boardwalk, if you can believe that, a little over about 25 years ago. And, it was it's kind of amazing for me to think of, folks going out there and building that, and you can see the picture of the aged boardwalk there, as well as, one of the key members of this, Mr. Phil Hayes, who's been a longtime Afrana board member and Parks Advisory board member for the county as well. And so, we got people out into the wetland with the boardwalk and tons of recreation and real just like relaxing solitude, bird watching, and getting out in nature. And about 2017, our natural resource coordinator for the county, Adam Stebbins, really stepped up and started looking at a major restoration project in the area. And especially when you're talking about the wetland prairie and the vernal pools that you see when you're out there on the open space looking toward Owens Farm. And so about 2017, that was another collaborative project with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, City of Corvallis, Greenbelt Land Trust, and Benton Soil and Water Conservation District to create a long-term restoration plan. With the support from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, they started in with the rough work of rebuilding that wetland, creating vernal pools, and planting. And so what you see out there right now, and if you've been out there in the last couple of weeks, you've probably been delighted with camas, elk, just tons of different bird species. And, that was a really big project that we're really proud of. I think Jackson Fraser Wetland is a real exemplary project of what can happen with collaboration with all of our partners, and it's just a really, really special place.
So as Dave said, the Alliance for Recreation in Natural Areas is a 501c3 nonprofit friends group. And we work with landowners and community members and other organizations throughout Benton County. And we've been thrilled to be a part of developing this vision for Owens Farm. And we've had several of our board members involved. But we also work not just with Benton County Natural Areas Parks and Events, but throughout the county. Siuslaw is a big partner through Mary's Peak Alliance to educate, to build interpretation, and to build love for the peak, to protect it. We've also done some meadow restoration up there. Down in South Benton County, a citizens group down there created a connectivity plan that was adopted as part of the transportation system plan, and also have planted the seeds for Monroe to get a Safe Routes to School grant. We're in the running, and it looks pretty good for neighborhood path grant. And there's also planted the seeds for collaboration between the Long Tom Watershed Council, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the tribes to remove the fish, to restore fish passage in Monroe, and also build a pedestrian bridge to the main city park, which is now only accessible by walking over the Highway 99 bridge. So if you want to learn more about what we do, please visit our website, which is on the slide.
I think Jesse, did you want to go over kind of how these plans nestle?
Yeah, so the 2040 Thriving Community Initiative is really the framework on which we make all of our land management decisions and recreation decisions on. And so that's been a big partnership with the Benton County Health Department. Really, the focus to really make a vibrant, livable community, get people out in high quality environments, and really promote health in all actions. And that's really a big component of the whole larger Owens Farm project. And, that's the initiative that we view everything through that lens, and, make sure that our projects fit those goals and, just improve health, recreation, access, and equity in Benton County.
Thanks, Jesse and Ellen and Meredith. I hope you all see this is not just another property or series of properties, and nor is it just about the land itself. As we're discussing, we're sharing this power of partnerships. There's a few voices that I think just wanted to make sure that you recognize that even those that you're hearing from are only a part of the story. I'd also like to really put a highlight on Benton County Health Department that has been a core piece of this work at Owens Farm and Jackson Fraser Wetlands, and this visioning by helping us to really center this as a healthy communities project. This project goes so far beyond a trail. It's about embedding healthy people in a healthy environment, appreciating that these values are inextricably linked and you don't get one without the other. Access is as much about our mental and spiritual health as it is about our physical. And, we kind of have this superhero collaborative that we are working on to demonstrate that at Owens Farm here. So how do we do this? This is another slide where there's a ton of information here. You're not going to be quizzed on this, and there's too much to really try to read all in once. But I will try to direct your attention to the key elements. This is a framework that partners developed really early on for this Owens Farm Jackson Fraser Wetlands Partnership. Essentially, how do we make good on this vision of promoting mental health, improving physical health, and strengthening social connections? The answers are multifold. They include reducing barriers to the outdoors, activating engaging programming, increasing access to the site for everyone, and enhancing natural features, native habitats on the site. We call this framework a framework rather than a plan, because it is meant to be adaptive and grow, as any good collaboration is able to evolve as we listen and engage with the broader community. And I know this looks great on paper, but you're like, well, these kinds of frameworks and plans are all a dime a dozen. How does this actually work? So what we have here is essentially the distillation of much of the process and partnership that we're sharing with you tonight. This is what we call the conceptual trail plan for the Owens Farm Jackson Fraser Wetlands. In 2021, the partners created this plan that utilizes that framework that I just shared on the previous slide to envision a network of trails and trailheads, educational opportunities through restored historical structures and interactive signage. Universally accessible trails create loops and meanders with benches at vistas overlooking the valley. For 20 years at Owens Farm, or 20 years plus, we have promised trails and educational access to our community. As Meredith had pointed out, the acquisition of what we see as Owens Farm portion of this network was facilitated in large part through the passage of the open space bond measure. And when you go back to the materials that our voters use to really educate themselves on, are they going to say yes or no to this open space bond measure? It really is about access and being able to not only protect green spaces at urban fringes, the 5 natural areas that were purchased through that open space bond measure, but also to be able to access them. So we've had this promise of trails and access. It's been woven into the very DNA of the bond measure, but also into the management plans at Greenbelt Land Trust and the city of Corvallis. And yet, we're finally at this moment where we're able to move that vision forward. Now is the time to activate that. And with the conceptual plan that you see before you, we are taking that original vision from 2 decades ago and expanding it, kind of blowing it up beyond what we ever thought was possible. So the trails that you're seeing here do not exist yet. This is our vision for the future. What you see in yellow outlined with red and black dashed line and surrounded by yellow is sort of what we're thinking as phase 1. And that is the series of trails that we think has the most opportunity to be able to move forward, is not necessarily contingent on other components like expansion of the hospital, parking and office spaces, things like that. So we're looking at how do we break this up into bite-sized pieces that we can make good on that promise and move forward for our community, while also designing those longer term pieces of connectivity and leveraging future things like growth at the hospital or planned extensions in the transportation plan for roads and connectivity. We see individuals of all ages and abilities finding community along these trails, learning about the natural world at their feet. Here you see a rendering of what that vision could look like. Over the last few years, we also worked with the landscape architecture students at the University of Oregon. A class dedicated an entire term to Owens Farm as their research project. And many of the renderings they have really helped us to put ideas on paper and envision what this might look like. We see opportunities to transition farmed fields into restored native prairies, teaching future generations about the importance of biodiversity, as well as maintaining our agricultural heritage and farming. We see Owens Farm opening the door to new trail users of all physical abilities to find a welcoming and accessible natural world to them. You know, this is a big vision, but it is tangible and it's before us at this moment. So core to this vision is community engagement. Soliciting ideas, especially from people who have most often found barriers to belonging in the outdoors and on trails. So when we're going to walk through the community engagement components that have happened over the last several years, and starting in 2019. In 2019, we coordinated amongst the partners the Universal Access Trail workshop titled Voices from the Community: Why Access, Equity, and Inclusion Matter. This gave voice through a series of panels and tours and focus groups to people in our community that have historically faced barriers to accessing the outdoors. This is bringing also, there was also an opportunity through this and through funding that we had through a few foundations to spark this early work, to bring in leaders from across the country to this series of workshops for land managers. It wasn't just for the Owens Farm Partners. We opened this to all land managers that focus on state parks, local government, nonprofits that are land managers working on trails and access in the Willamette Valley. We had an incredible turnout because this topic is so relevant and so front and center for our minds in our communities, and people grappling with, like, how do we change this? How do we think differently about trails and infrastructure? So we brought in national leaders in accessible trail design, folks from the East Coast that had really piloted incredible projects of healthy communities and healthy trails for all. It started the conversation about what might be possible at Owens Farm and Jackson Fraser wetlands. And it helped us to also start to really understand some of the core concepts. And one of those that really stands out to me is something that I learned early on in this process of workshops, was that 25% of Oregonians report having a disability that makes accessing nature more difficult or impossible. I was shocked by that. I hope that you are sort of too. 25%, 1 in 4 people report having a disability in Oregon. And the barriers to the outdoors we learned about through the voices of peers in our community are physical, they're social, they are cultural. We heard from panelists, people in our community who have not found themselves welcomed on trails in Corvallis or Willamette because of their abilities, because of the color of their skin. And we also really learned from those leaders across the country about the importance of infrastructure, about trail design being extremely thoughtful and strategic. Things from lighting and types of lighting along a trail, shade and the importance of shade, length of trail, signage that engages different senses. And these are all important elements learned during these discussions. It really started to have us rethink trails as a health project, not necessarily just a recreation. Really making sure that we started our conversations at Owens Farm and Jackson Fraser partnership embedded in the DNA of healthy communities first and foremost. We also began with that incredible partnership with the University of Oregon Landscape Architecture research project, and that helped to really grease the wheels in thinking about what is possible. It's really different to talk about something than it is to actually see some ideas put around on paper. And then the next year, we're really looking at how do we solicit more input, more feedback, especially from those that are in positions of power. We held a series of tours specifically for elected leaders. In this outing here, we had Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley's staff. We had state senators and reps. We had county commissioners, city councilors, and community leaders as part of these series of conversations, really about generating support and interest in piloting this new partnership for trails, for safe transportation, for raising awareness about those gaps that we were learning about related to the demographics of people who are being excluded from outdoor spaces and that ripple effect that that has on community health. So this is an early on process of really getting buy-in and thinking about sort of from a systems level, what can we be doing? What are opportunities that we can have to be able to kind of change the course here? And then as we went into 2021, our commitment to really became front and center to hear from those in our community who have faced barriers to the outdoors, really bringing them out to the Owens Farm site and hearing directly from them on what they envision for the trails, for the infrastructure, for transportation, for signage, for all of the above. How would they feel welcomed in this space? Over the course of several months in 2021, the partners, and we had a wonderful intern that helped facilitate this, sponsored this series of outings, one-on-one interviews, focus groups with people from different backgrounds and abilities to gain that insight. This was also the sweet spot where we were just after post-vaccinations had just been unveiled, and before I think it was the Omicron variant. So we were like, okay, we can be outside together in this space. It was a special moment, I think, for everybody. This community engagement phase, again, was scheduled early on in the process before we designed the trail to give traditionally underserved communities the opportunity to participate early in the process and to help build that shared vision for the trail. And out of that, we had findings that came out through an engagement report. And essentially, these are some of the primary buckets of findings: fostering a sense of belonging and inclusion, access to nature, cultivating a feeling of safety, comfort, and enjoyment of the outdoors. And I would be happy to share that report. I'm sure the partners would with anybody that was interested. So our emails are at the end. Please reach out and I'd be happy to share that with you. And as we wrapped up this initial community engagement phase, as we wrap that up, we are now poised for what is all to come. We now pivot to showcase 3 projects, highlights for you. What is happening on the ground right now? What is happening within the Owens Farm Jackson Fraser system? And how does that really tie back to this thinking about healthy communities, healthy trails and transportation, and this idea of a radically inclusive space for our community? And I'm going to start off by handing this over to the county. Ellen and Jesse.
Hey, thank you, Jessica. So, you know, the wetland itself, the fine silt and clay soil that we have out there, you know, the main function of that wetland is really to clean the water, essentially. And so when all that water flows down through the hills to the east, and all the runoff that comes off Highway 99, that water could be, you know, pretty polluted, but we slow it down. It filters through the silt and clay, is uptaken by all the native plants there, and it's really our kind of water washing machine there in the north of Corvallis. And so, you know, we've got several different wetland types there, and we've got several zones. And so we manage it with an adaptive management strategy where, you know, we manage each area specifically in a way that fits its topography and plant makeup. And so there's a lot of variations on how we manage it and where we plant what and what type of work we do. Largely keeping back the invasive species with the reed canary grass, the cattails, and out in the wetland prairie there, you know, trying to stop the encroachment of the ash groves and keeping that open for all of the 100 plus or 300 plus species of flowering plants, which is amazing. And if anybody has an opportunity in the next several weeks to head out there, I would highly recommend it because it's putting on quite a show with all the wildflowers. We've had the opportunity to be out there a lot lately, and It's really one of the, you're really starting to see what all that restoration work, has done. And so with that brings the over 70 plus species of birds. I mentioned earlier that we've been seeing a lot of elk sightings lately, and that's really, just super special. You can go out there at any given time and see multiple species. Anytime I go out there, I see a lot of bird watchers, a lot of folks just sitting there to listen and observe. And one of the most special things about this wetland is its proximity to Cheltenham Middle School. Cheltenham Middle School has been using that site as their own private research laboratory for a long time. They've helped us do seed collection, planting, and the teachers take the students out there for educational classes. And that's a very special relationship that we have with Corvallis School District and Cheltenham Middle School, being their local wetland. And that's one of our goals, is to really take those kids out there and do our best to instill that sense of ownership for them, that this is their special place. Give them a chance to plant and help support the work out there, and really get them invested, get their families invested in how important that place is. And so Jackson Fraser Wetlands, this Owens Farm partnership is all about collaboration. And throughout the history of the Jackson Fraser Wetland, there's been a lot of people involved to make this happen, whether it's being able to use certain equipment to scrape and create the vernal pools at the start of the long-term restoration project, or whether it's to get informational signage out there, or seed collection, weed control, you name it. This has really been a story of collaboration since really the early 90s. And that's something that I've always been shocked by in Benton County. The partners here and the people that have set this up a long time ago, they really have had partnership and connectivity in mind. And I think that's what makes Benton County so special, is that we all are so willing to work together and to make that happen. And so there's a picture of my daughter and her friend out there visiting the wetland a few days ago. And it was absolutely gorgeous while we're out there. It's just such a place of solitude and peace. And really, it's amazing for your spirit to go out to the Jackson Fraser Wetland and take a walk. And it won't be long before we're able to connect with the rest of the Owens Farm project. And on that, yes. So in 2022, this was a lot of work by our department, our maintenance team, and Adam Stebbins, our natural resource coordinator, and the vision of him and all the partners that we've had. And we won the State Land Board Award for long-term habitat restoration, and we're very proud of that. I do think that the Jackson Fraser Wetland, when you go out there, it really can serve as a model of wetland management and design. And so with that, I would pass it over to Ellen to talk about the Bob Frankel Boardwalk.
Okay, the boardwalk is a legacy that was left for us by Bob Frankel, thus the name. Legacy is all about learning from the past, living in the present, and building for the future. Really, we're all connected by legacies that have been passed down from those who came before us, and the legacies that we pass to those who come after us. I'm going to just give you some of Bob's own words because they say it better than I can. Here certainly is a beautiful place of wildness, a place to teach us about change and how ephemeral nature is, a place to get lost in, a changing fragment of the past, a living museum, classroom, and laboratory, a peaceful place where one can take refuge from the hassles of everyday life and gain inspiration, and a place close to the settled landscape where one can celebrate and wonder about the diversity of the natural world. Jackson Fraser Wetland is unique not just for the outstanding wetland. The flat terrain, good sidewalks in the area accommodate seniors, wheelchairs, and families with children. It's one of the few accessible parks and wetlands in Corvallis proper, something that the Owens Farm vision will build on and expand. It's in a very diverse neighborhood within Corvallis. And we've spoken to a lot of the residents in the neighborhood, and it is very well loved and very well used. And as Jesse said, within walking distance of Shelwyn, it's really a rich outdoor classroom. Natural areas, we preserve them or restore them and dedicate them to and prioritize for nature. Interaction with natural spaces really helps humans develop a reciprocal relationship with nature, being present, learning about it, and recognizing our hand in stewardship. It's really critical to ensuring that people support natural areas in the decades ahead and to growing stewards of the future. We've seen the impact humans can have on our common outdoor spaces. How do we take care of a natural space and love it without loving it to death? That's always a tension that we're dealing with. The boardwalk is key to this at Jackson Fraser. It allows people to experience and learn about nature within an area that's designed for them and also preserves the wetland for nature. It really took a remarkable vision and dedication from the community 25 years ago to build the boardwalk and construct a way for all ages and abilities to wander into the wetland. Unfortunately, the boardwalk has deteriorated. It has required extensive maintenance, and some areas are not even maintainable anymore. In fact, parts of it are actually falling apart. This means that many of the people who enjoyed access can no longer use the boardwalk. The area within the boardwalk was blocked from the outstanding habitat restoration that Jesse discussed, and it really needs to be addressed as part of rebuilding the boardwalk. This is the first on-the-ground trail project of the Owens Farm vision to enhance a thriving natural landscape and develop a radically inclusive trail system. As the old adage goes, make new friends and keep the old. We're confident the community will come together again to preserve and restore the boardwalk and perpetuate the legacy given to us by Bob Frankel.
Thank you, Ellen. And now we're on to Meredith.
All right, so the City of Corvallis Parks and Rec Department on our portion is the historical structures that I mentioned previously that you can see from Highway 99. There are a number of structures. Overall, I would say that 20 years ago, the vision for this property was to preserve and protect the historical significance in those historic structures. And the ultimate vision, as described in our Owens Farm Management Plan, is that this homestead could be used as a demonstrative working farm, that the primary focus would be on education and history, that the home could potentially be restored and transformed either into a replica of the time in which it was constructed and various times from the late 1800s up into the 1950s. And that the orchards and the nut trees and the farming itself could be recreated as well. Really, the goal is for people to be able to get up and close and really feel what it would feel like being a pioneer during that time. So a little bit about the history. There's a lot of history with these structures, but I know that there's a question in the Q&A. So I'm going to just kind of start with the very beginning, and then later on we can fill you in. But William Knotts Sr. was born in 1805 in Maryland. married Sylvia Wilsey, born 1825, and they married in Illinois in 1844. They left Iowa for Oregon country. Upon their arrival, they stayed in what is now Washington County. And in 1849, they moved to this site and filed a 640-acre donation land claim. And although Congress did not pass the Donation Land Act until December 1st of 1850, those who declared their intention to file and who resided on and cultivated the land for 4 years were granted 320 acres if single and 640 acres if married. And originally Knott's built a one-room log house that was located northeast of the current house and planted wheat. And his first agricultural field stood just to the north of Highway 99 and to the south of Knott's Creek, which is today Jackson Creek. William Knotts served as a Benton County clerk, and it said that that log house was the site of the first Benton County court. The farmhouse itself was dates from the late 1870s or early 1880s. It does have historic status at the county level. The barn predates the house, and there are several other supporting structures on the site, including a machine shed, a pump house, and a brooder house. When the city purchased the property, it was actually occupied by Tom Owens, which is a descendant of the family. And he actually continued to live at the property for another decade or so. After he vacated the property, many volunteers here in city staff cataloged items from inside the house, and those are still in storage today. Currently, the property is leased for agricultural uses, and we do our best on a shoestring budget to keep the house standing. The barn has unfortunately mostly fallen to the ground, but on the positive side, we do have plans to rebuild it, plans in which we can rebuild it from to its original state. So what are we doing now? Right now, this partnership has really motivated and kind of inspired the city and Parks and Rec in particular to put more attention on making sure that we do what we can to preserve and protect what is still on the property as far as the structures. Our recent actions include further cleaning out of the interior of the house, which actually still had a variety of things that were considered not valuable or not of historical significance necessarily. But there were still items in the house. And so recently we've cleared that out. We've put some attention into clearing of the vegetation away from the house. And so you may have noticed passing by that you can see more of the house than you had in the past. Right now, we're also looking at future projects that would include fencing, more stabilization of the house and of the other structures, weatherproofing, and security measures. The other historical structure on the site, which is next slide, please, is the Sunnyside School. And the Sunnyside School was built in 1911, and it was relocated in 2014 from 9th Street. And this was achieved through community members' generous donation to save the schoolhouse when it was slated for demolition to make way for new housing. The school operated, I have a little typo there, but the school operated from 1912 to 1929, and then it served as a private residence until 2013. So the significance of the schoolhouse and the Knotts Owen farm is that Mrs. Knotts taught at the school, and the Knotts children actually attended this school as well. So when it was moved to the site, a new foundation was poured. They stabilized the structure, a new roof was added. The roof actually had to be removed for the transport of it. And the bell tower was constructed as that was no longer on the structure, but is now replicated. The vision for the schoolhouse being placed on the property is in conjunction with the homestead, the museum aspect, the historical farming aspect. This particular building, it's about 900 square feet, could serve as a visitor center and a classroom or meeting space. So we envision school buses coming, bringing kids on field trips and being able to learn in this space and engage with the land and really kind of feel what it might have been like to be there in that time. And I just wanted to kind of throw in a mention here in a photo that we have made contact with a local resident who has an old school bell, or an old bell, I should say, not specifically from this school, but one that is of the period that we are in conversations about receiving that as a donation so that we can reinstall a school bell in that bell tower eventually.
Thank you, Meredith. So exciting to think about that future come alive, or that living history. So now we're going to look at the third kind of highlight for what's going on at Owens Farm, Jackson Fraser Wetlands right now. Let's dial back to that conceptual trail plan map and draw your eyes to a specific piece of infrastructure, the bike ped bridge connecting Owens Farm and Jackson Fraser Wetlands. So you see it right here. That is what you get when you start thinking about larger community needs. The trails are one aspect, wanting to connect trails at Jackson Fraser and trails at Owens Farm. But when you broaden your gaze to think about what areas of the community are, say, landlocked, that have inequitable access to school, to work, to healthcare, these are the types of expansive projects that you get to start working with. And these, when we think about why here, why now? These North Corvallis neighborhoods comprise the 5 highest scoring scores for what is known as the ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation Disadvantaged Index, or Corvallis, is in the Shelderland neighborhoods that this is connecting. This index compiles a variety of vulnerability layers, things even like flooding vulnerability, access to safe crossings, multimodal paths, socioeconomic and health demographics. And it highlights where are areas that have the least amount of transportation options that help build resilience and health at the family and at the community level. Currently, north of Conifer, there are no signalized crossing options for over 2 miles. Anyone trying to cross the highway on the north end of Corvallis, either to get to school or traveling to or into and out of town, can only bike or walk along the shoulder of the highway. There have no comfortable crossing locations throughout this area. We also know that employment growth in North Corvallis, as well as residential growth in Adair Village, has been especially strong in recent years. In Adair, where there have been 170 new homes in 2020, we also anticipate in Adair to have the highest growth rate of any city in Benton County over the next 20 years. Yet people living in North Corvallis and surrounding areas near the Highway 99, all of which have those high transportation disadvantage index scores, do not have the connected low stress walking and biking options common to so many other neighborhoods. So what are we doing about this? This is kind of like the background of how does this get prioritized? Did I ever think that I'd be working on a bike ped bridge? Not necessarily, but here we are. And it's really exciting. I think when you listen to the community and the needs, you have to be open to where that's going to take you. And for us, that has taken us to a point of having this massive infrastructure and prioritizing that. Through the partners, we have been able to get this bike ped bridge adopted within the regional transportation plan. So just as Meredith and Jesse kind of looked at the thriving initiatives and the Imagine Corvallis 2040 plans and how everything else is nestled within it, we have to understand that especially a piece of capital infrastructure like this really needs to be set in stone and adopted at that policy level, at the regional transportation plan level, in order to really think about it becoming a reality down the road. And for all the reasons that we've talked about related to those surrounding neighborhoods, it was a sort of a no-brainer to make sure that this actually did get adopted into that RTP. And I just wanted to point out that, you know, we're talking about a lot of the partners here. Jesse mentioned Sheldon Middle School. When we started doing outreach related to thinking about funding and fundraising for assessing viability for that bike ped bridge, we were reaching out to the schools, so that Sheldon, Letitia Carson, Crescent Valley, and others that also, Bessie Coleman, that access, you know, might benefit, their students may benefit because of where they live. And I would just say that it's a real testament that everybody we talked to said, absolutely, yes, I will be part of this. I support this strongly, and our students need this. I wanted to point out 2 quotes from some of those leaders in the schools. Eric Beasley, who was the principal at Letitia Carson, who had said, the potential of the Paths project cannot be understated for the safety of our children at our school. The science teacher at Sheldon Middle School said, when I first learned about this project to build a bike and pedestrian bridge across Highway 99 connecting Jackson Fraser Wetland to Owens Farm, Good Samaritan Hospital, and the neighborhoods, my mind filled with potential teaching and learning opportunities for Sheldon students. My teaching partner and I have been working to implement project-based learning units, as Jesse mentioned, at Jackson Fraser Wetlands, including participating in habitat projects with several community partners. We plan to expand these learning projects in the coming years, and a pedestrian connector to natural areas north of the highway provides us countless new opportunities. So thinking about both from the safety aspect, we're hearing from those schools that this is integral, talking to the principal at Crescent Valley about how many times he or a member of their staff are talking to students that live maybe in the Sheldon neighborhood and are kind of stuck at high school and trying to figure out, how do I get home right now? And the fact that not only is it at a distance, but it's also a really unsafe route that they're going. And so they're trying to find routes and options and alternative options for students that maybe miss the bus or whatever the case may be, are there for activities after school. So just to recognizing there's many different reasons that this has become a priority for us. And it really started out of a trails, let's connect these trails. And yet there's so much more that I think our understanding has really raised about why this is a priority. So what is next for this bike ped bridge? And it doesn't happen overnight. First of all, I just want to call out this beautiful photo here is from the Vancouver Land Bridge. If you're in Vancouver, Washington, near Fort Vancouver in downtown Vancouver, go and walk this bridge. It's part of the Confluence project up there. And Maya Lin was one of the designers and architects for this. It's a bridge for people, for wildlife, for art, and transportation. So first off, we know that funds are needed. Really, to think about a bike ped bridge, you need to start beyond the conceptual trail plan, beyond all of the backing of like, why do we need this, and all the information and research that we had amassed, was really thinking about how do we take this to the next step, the engineering, the design, the exact siting. And so we had applied through Oregon Department of Transportation's Community Paths Grant in early January of 2023 for a project refinement grant, which allows us essentially to be able to do all of that engineering and spec work for the bridge. And as a $700,000 grant, when I got the list of who had all applied for that project refinement grant, it was pretty daunting, right? Because there were many more applicants and many more requests for funding, really strong proposals than ever could be funded because of the amount they had in the pool. 3 weeks ago, the recommendations came out for the Community Paths Grant, and there were 23 project refinement grants. 9 were recommended for funding. This project you see in front of you was ranked as number 1. And on May 22nd, just in a couple of days, the Oregon Bike Ped Advisory Committee will be formally making that recommendation for funding. So I think that, why did we get ranked number 1? When I look back at all of the backing, all of the support from the partners, the land managers, also the access related to schools and those communities that really are the most disadvantaged, being able to provide access to them, as well as to the hospital. Thinking about all of these multi-layers here at this incredible series of properties, this is a unique place. And we have an opportunity that to really make a difference for a broad sector of our community. I also would just point out that the fact that in here in Benton County and Corvallis with this project, we started with the community. We started hearing from those that had faced adversity to the outdoors is a different way than many projects are going forward. And I'm really proud of our community and our partnership that we have centered those voices. And I think that that is now coming out in the support that we're seeing from funders and how to move this forward. So we're looking at these next components that should all be funded through that project refinement grant, engineering, the siting, the permitting, and then leading us, getting us well poised to then submit the construction multi-million-dollar construction grant. So moving on from those three highlights, what is the steering committee of Owens Farm Jackson Fraser Wetlands working on? Fundraising. The opportunities at our doorstep are monumental right now. This is it. We are also building out our final construction budget for the entire trail infrastructure for that historic preservation component, as well as just ongoing maintenance, making sure we have the funds in the door to steward this incredible resource that we are sort of opening the door to for our community, and including both sides of the highway and the boardwalk. We're moving into raising funds. Grants will be really key to this, have already been and will be going forward, but this project is really big, it's bold, and it needs a diversity of funding streams to support it. And this is where our community comes in. We will be unveiling more opportunities for people that are inspired and engaged and want to see this move forward, for how you want to be able to support it financially, or know friends and neighbors that you want to compel and invite them on a walk and see if this is something that really fits their family values and where they want to put their money. We're also we have talked about public engagement, community engagement. Those steps aren't over. This is a continual feedback loop and outreach. We're reaching out to new elected leaders. Last year, we had city council and county commissioners and other community leaders out on the property. We also have many new people that have just come in the last year, also doing coordinating outreach through Ward 9 and the broader community and through the hospital. And we're moving on to trail construction and building stabilization. Some of those were already touched on in Meredith and Jesse's presentations and Ellen's. And then also this bike ped bridge is a body of work in and of itself. And now that we know that we kind of have we'll have the green light to be moving forward, making sure that we have a thorough process for project design, community input, and again, be as well poised as humanly possible for that construction grant to follow. So how do you get involved? Tonight, we are unveiling 2 new outings to Jackson Fraser Wetlands and to Owens Farm. And you get the first priority as somebody who has not only joined tonight's presentation, but also stayed until 8:18. You get to know about this outing. We'll also hopefully be able to have an email that can go out to attendees with this information. The best way to engage with this project is by walking the land or coming out and visiting it with us. Think big with us, get your questions answered, meet the partners. And it's really exciting to be at this beginning stage together as the project takes shape, imagining, essentially everything that is possible. Imagining, what about a pavilion with room for reflection and art? What about winding paths that celebrate first foods? But gathering places and sitting under the shade that allow you to sit under the shade of a beautiful Garyana oak. Or being part of history coming alive as historic structures take on a new life for community meeting spaces and agriculture. These are just some of the many design possibilities as we move from concept to reality and construction. We hope that you're inspired, ready to engage, excited to support what is next. And with that, on behalf of the talented group of partners, those that are here and those that are not speaking this evening, thank you for attending. Your ongoing support for this collaborative is appreciated. And let's hear from you. Let's hear your questions. So I'm going to stop screen sharing, and Bonnie, I think we'll be able to facilitate our questions.
Great, yeah. A number of those questions we have been answering through typing as the night has gone on, but please do submit some more questions for us. John asked a big question, so I'll throw that out just to start. So there's a few comments as well with it. I fully support public access to public trust lands and the educational and passive recreational opportunities they offer, but I am concerned that at the same time we have adequate spatial and temporal planning to assure we do not have significant environmental impacts on sensitive trust resources. Please elaborate on how you are managing the potential conflicts that could occur from improperly managed public access goals.
Well, I could speak on the Jackson Fraser side. You know, we really do try to keep people out of the wetland area, especially where the vernal pools are. And so with our conceptual trail plan, it's a real light touch, you know, connecting along the border of the city of Corvallis property over to the pedestrian land bridge, you know, and timing a seasonal mow trail to promote the least amount of impact to get folks out there to enjoy the wetland. So that really is a big focus for us. We have to tread lightly. You know, it takes a lot of time to get all of that, those plants and species established. And we do have to watch it, you know, from soil compression to, you know, dogs just running out there to disturb the waterfowl and the bird species. So that's a big deal for us, for sure. And I know it is for my partners as well.
And I think one piece of this, just to go back to when we think about management and especially managing public access anywhere, is making sure that we have thoughtful design, you know, on the trail. And also, as I just mentioned about funding, you know, the ability to manage is often, you know, also how much do you have the funds to be able to put the gravel in, to do the erosion control, whatever the case may be, to be able to manage that access and make sure that the trails are in the, you know, the shape that they need to be or that they started from. And so that's going back to our motivation to not only look at the capital costs of this project, but really to think about this as an entire holistic project that includes both the upfront costs as well as the ongoing maintenance and management costs for the entire, you know, area from Jackson Fraser wetlands through Owens Farm. And I think one of the other pieces of this is really being able to leverage this partnership. Often when we're managing public trails, it may be one entity, you know, that owns and manages that trail network. Right now, we have this great opportunity to really think about how all of us play a role in land management across, whether it's our portion of the property or not, but really thinking about this as a more collaborative effort. And I think that there's quite a bit that we have to be able to leverage in terms of that partnership and management of public access.
I think one other piece is the public outreach and education piece. The more people understand about the sensitivity of the wetlands and understand the ecology of the wetlands, and the more engaged the community, the local neighborhoods are, I think the more they actually also look out for the area and take care of it.
Great, thank you. Someone asks, what is the city's plan for use of the farmhouse and school? Is that in their management plan and is that available?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The management plan is available online. It's on our website. If you navigate to the Parks and Recreation Department through the city website, you'll see a menu option called Resources. And then the next click will be called Documents, and it is in that listing with a link there. As I had mentioned, you know, the original vision for the farmhouse was to preserve it, restore it, and have it act as an interpretive and educational space for the community. So beyond that, I think that it kind of runs the gamut of what that ends up being. I mean, I've heard stories that one idea contemplated many years ago was even having a caretaker who lived at the land and managed it. I don't know, you know, I specifically haven't studied the feasibility of that, nor have the partners in recent history, but I think it could run the gamut of whether it's a museum, whether it's a replica, a walkthrough, type of a situation. It may be opened, some hours for people to visit on open hours, or it might be reservation only. So those things are still to be determined. And the schoolhouse, again, the vision was kind of more of a classroom kind of setting for the schoolhouse as a place where groups could come and use that as a classroom or meeting room in conjunction with the interpretive and educational functions of the farmstead.
I might point out that in addition to the partners, the land managers, and the friends groups that we've talked about, we also have key connections to historic preservation groups, whether it's Benton County Historical Society, Preservation Works, different people, as well as those that were involved in the relocation of the schoolhouse. And I feel like it's really been another powerful kind of step forward, is really engaging or re-engaging those people that have deep ties to historic preservation in our community, to bring them in as part of this feedback loop and this community engagement, and really thinking about how do you help us answer some of these hard questions about upkeep, management, what vision, all of the above for historic structures. I wanted to point out that I did put in the answered portion, if you click on answered in the Q&A, the link for the Owens Farm Tour on June 7th, there is information on how to register for that there.
Great, thanks for doing that. Lynn asks, what about an endowment for long-term maintenance?
Yes, thanks, Lynn. And I think when we think about long-term management and maintenance and stewardship, whether it's couched as essentially what is permanently restricted endowment, or if it's just more operated in that, which is meant to be perpetual, and the spending policy for it is really meant to be able to be there in perpetuity and help steward this site forward, is how we've talked about this. How do we make sure it's not just a fund that's there for 5 or 10 years, but something that really is there for the future of the partnership and the infrastructure that we're investing so heavily in here. And if you want to help us create an endowment fund, you know where to find me.
Great. All right, y'all. Well, I'm not seeing many other questions. I think we covered them, so we're probably good. Dave, did you want to come on and say anything before we sign out for the night? If you can hear me.
Sure. Hi. Woo. Get down here. Yeah. No, I just want to thank all the speakers, and this is a great project. Come to all of us. I think you'll get a lot of support everywhere throughout Corvallis. As long as people can get out there and see what it is, I think they'll really, really appreciate this. And I spent a lot of time up in that area, and it really needs this badly. And so thank you very much. And I look forward to working with you whenever possible on this project in the future. Hope to see more of you.
Thank you all for your time. Thank you for your work, and thank you for sharing it with us tonight. So thank you all for joining us. And this will be recorded. We'll send out the recording in about 24 hours. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
you.
Bonnie.
Thank
Good
you.
night.